Please be seated. Well, good morning, St. Margaret's. So good to be with you on this fifth Sunday in Lent. I thought I'd kind of dive in this morning. I want to talk a little bit about the season that we're in at the moment. I want to talk about Lent. I think I've mentioned this to you once or twice now, but there is a quite intentional arc to Lent. There's a shape to this season we're in. You can see the arc reflected in our lectionary readings as well as kind of other aspects of our liturgy. And this arc to Lent, it's meant to act as a guide of sorts as we make our way, as we navigate through this season. Now, Lent, of course, it starts with Ash Wednesday. And Ash Wednesday is all about some of the most basic, uncomfortable truths of human existence. And truths concerning our mortality, our frailty, our fallenness. Following Ash Wednesday, those very early Sundays in Lent, they're marked by similar themes. Ideas like temptation, judgment, repentance, and restoration. The aim of these early weeks of Lent is a simple one: introspection. Lent is an invitation to introspection. More than just introspection, though, I think these early weeks of Lent are an opportunity for us to realize that each and every one of us is in need of something. We all fall short, after all. We all stray and we all wander. We might not journey as far as the prodigal son, but we all know what it is to be far from home. But then, something wonderful happens. In the words of the gospel text that we read last week, we come to our senses. We come to our senses and our gaze shifts. The journey inward shifts outward. Centripetal forces give way to centrifugal forces. The reason for this, and I know this is going to be a little controversial for me to say in 2022, but the reason for this is that we're not meant to stay in a place of introspection. I know that we like to think about ourselves, right? I know that we're comfortable dwelling upon ourselves, but we are meant for something more. The goal of introspection is for us to get up and to seek after that which we truly need. Again, like the prodigal son, we're supposed to look ahead. We're supposed to look for home. It's for all this that the arc of Lent bends here at the end. It bends, and we're invited to consider the final days of the life of Jesus Christ. You see, the Gospels, right? The Gospels describe for us 3 years of active ministry. The Gospels talk about 3 years of teaching and healing and transforming lives. But that's not the heart of the Gospels. The heart of the Gospels is that final journey to Jerusalem, that final week of Jesus' life. It's what takes up most of the Gospels. And it's a journey where everything comes into focus. Everyone who knows or follows Jesus, everyone who knows about Jesus, they find themselves at a crossroads that last week. And every reaction is different. Some who had followed Jesus for a season will find themselves this last week departing from him. Others, maybe some of those who had hesitated to follow after Jesus, will find themselves at last drawing near. And still others, realizing at last that Jesus was not a conquering king, but rather a suffering servant. They'll find themselves ready to betray Jesus. All this unfolds over a matter of days. And these final weeks of Lent, they teach us that these final days, they're more than just moments of decision for the people that followed Jesus 2,000 years ago. They're moments of decision for us as well. Even now, we can shift our eyes to Jesus. We can ask whether he's truly what we need. We can come to a crossroads and we can consider whether the kingdom that Jesus came proclaiming in the end is our home as well. That's the invitation of these final days of Lent. And to do this work, to cast our eyes upon Jesus, it's always helpful to have a model, right? It's always helpful to have someone who's done it well, and I don't think there's anyone that does it better than Mary. I mean, she gets these final days of Jesus right. The story that we heard just a few moments ago, it's one of my favorites in all the Gospels. It is tender and poignant and bittersweet. It's an image of Jesus in these final hours of his life, when everything is being stripped away and everything else is stepping into the light. And people are realizing before our very eyes what it is that matters most to them. Okay, so let's dive into our gospel text. As John explains to us, it is 6 days before the Passover, and Jesus is in Bethany. And Bethany is just a couple miles outside of Jerusalem. Jesus has made this journey all the way to Jerusalem. And now he's at the home of Lazarus, whom Jesus had, at this point, just recently raised from the dead. You might not know this, but in the Gospel of John, the raising of Lazarus, it's an inflection point for the Gospel. You know, something about the life of Jesus. And by life, I mean more than just biology, but also that unceasing, unquenchable power of Jesus. A power that was able to summon a man out of a tomb. Something about the life of Jesus has angered a few of the people around Jesus. You know, Jesus' life, at this point in the gospel, it's in danger. Jesus is a wanted man. He's days away from being arrested. And yet, despite all this, despite being a wanted man, Jesus attends a dinner. It's a dinner given in his honor. And I think we can assume safely that this is a dinner of gratitude. It's a way for these three siblings to offer their gratitude for what Jesus has done and how Jesus has forever changed their lives. I love the fact that these three individuals who are so dear to Jesus, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, they are staying true to themselves, true to the image that emerges of them out of the Gospels. You know, Martha, as she so often does, is serving the meal. Lazarus is at table with his friends. And Mary, she chooses a different, much better way. John tells us that Mary takes a very large jar of very expensive perfume and uses that perfume to anoint the feet of Jesus. She uses her hair as the means of gently caressing and wiping the feet of Jesus. It's a tender and arresting image. It's an image, I think, that would stand out in any generation. I think any generation that hears this story would take notice. But I'm convinced it strikes our generation as especially unusual. Think about it for a second. Mary's act is a moment of profound attention, which is rather strange for those of us living in a distracted age. Mary's act is a moment of profound sincerity, which is maybe a little bit embarrassing for those of us who live in an ironic age. And Mary's act, most importantly, it's a moment of profound worship. And this is challenging for those of us who live in an age where we struggle to know what it is we worship and why. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to spend the time that remains, just a few moments, talking about these three characteristics that I mentioned a moment ago. I think of them as three characteristics that are necessary for us to developing a Christ-centered gaze, for us to actually cast our eyes upon Jesus. Three characteristics, again, are attention, sincerity, and worship. Okay, first, attention. I think we all know the fact that we live in a profoundly distracted age. We are distracted not just by the mechanics of our modern life, our phones and tablets, our laptops and televisions, but also by the social dynamics of our modern life. In an age of social media, friends, we are often consumed by the irrelevant at the expense of the critical. We're often consumed by the human at the expense of the divine. To illustrate what I mean by this, let's return to Mary. She would have suspected that eyes were upon her when she kind of loudly broke that jar of perfume. And she would have known that she was at the center of everyone's attention when the smell of perfume overwhelmed that modest home. But don't miss this. At the moment when every eye was on Mary, her eyes were on Jesus. Friends, I say this in love. We are too focused on one another as opposed to the living God. Too many of us are making our way through this world thinking so much about the people that either delight us or anger us. We are a distracted people, and we are neglecting the one who gave himself for us. Second, sincerity. Once again, I don't think it's terribly controversial for me to say that we live in a rather ironic age. Our irony is a form of self-defense. I think we were struggling before the pandemic. And now, having lived through a global pandemic, so many of us are wounded. We are grieving. And we're angry, but I think the anger is just a cloak of our grief. And irony is just a great way to defend ourselves. It allows us to deny, to deflect, even try to escape what it is we're experiencing. You know, irony, it's a stance of detachment. It lets us take a step back to stop contributing for a moment and perhaps to criticize instead, to comment. Returning again to Mary, what a contrast we see in this act of devotion. There is no guile in what she's doing. Everyone is staring at her, and she doesn't care. She's not making a point. She's not trying to be popular. She's not trying to be unpopular. She's not gaming the system. She's not hiding who she is. No, she knows exactly what she needs to do, prepare Jesus for his burial. And then she does it with sincerity and in truth. Finally, and like I said, most importantly, there is worship. In the end, this moment, this anointing is an act of worship. This is worship on the part of Mary. Judas, of course, so quick to criticize. Judas points out, not terribly helpfully, that the perfume could have been sold for 300 denarii. A denarii, of course, was about a day's wage for a laborer. And so what we're talking about here is an entire year's worth of wages. This is costing Mary, well, everything. This is costing Mary everything. That's worship. Offering our lives on the altar of God's grace is worship. Mary really seizes the moment here. It's been 3 long years of ministry for Jesus. She spent 3 years supporting Jesus as the women around Jesus did. She's been praying for him. She's been following after him. She's been believing in him. And she knows that in this moment, the journey at last is coming to an end. The ministry is winding down. Jesus will be with her and the others for a while, and then he'll be gone. She knows all this, and so she's seizing this moment to worship. She's picking up her cross and walking after the one who so soon will pick up his cross. She's giving the full measure of herself to the one who soon will give his full measure. She's fixing not just her eyes, but her heart on what truly mattered. I'll go ahead and close now with this thought. As we enter these final, really, hours of Lent, I want to encourage you to once again cast your eyes upon Christ. These next 2 weeks, they can be powerful days if we let them be. So let the beauty of Christ draw you to his side. Let the beauty of this moment between Mary and Jesus draw your heart into something new, something different. Mary had these hours with Jesus, and then he was gone, and then he was back, and then he was gone again. This morning, Jesus is with us. He will always be with us just as he promised, and we can fix our eyes, we can fix our hearts, we can fix our very lives on that unshakable truth. Let that truth call you into the worship that Mary teaches us about this morning. May that truth change us, change me, change you, now and always. Amen.